Do not worry, I'm not going to preach from all of these. A theme of thankfulness or gratitude can be found throughout Holy Scripture. It permeates almost every book of the 66 books we have. I want to share with you today two very familiar Thanksgiving passages. And as I share them with you, I would like you to focus upon how gratitude is emphasized. The first I share with you is actually a parable that Jesus told. So I'm going to look to Luke chapter 18 first. And then I'm going to share with you an episode, a scene from the life of Jesus that is often reflected upon during this time of year. Luke chapter 18. Verse 9, Jesus says, "To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everybody else." Remember that. Looked down on everybody else. Jesus told this parable. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. That was not unheard of. Jewish people would go to the temple to pray at 9 in the morning, 12 noon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They would pray in the morning at home and the night at home, but those 3 times of public prayer when they would enter into the temple courts. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, noted religious authority, stood up and prayed about himself. Prayed about himself. "God," he prayed, "I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers and evildoers and adulterers, or even like this tax collector guy over here." What a prayer. "I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all I get." Actually, a devout Jew is only required to fast once a year at the Day of Atonement. But if you especially wanted to be one who lived by the letter of the law, you might fast twice a week. It's interesting that those fast days tended to be Monday and Thursdays, which were market days, and the Pharisees would fast when so many people were in the city coming to market so that they could be seen. He prayed, remember, thus to himself. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and he said, "God, have mercy on me, I'm a sinner." He had messed up, as have all of us messed up. Then Jesus said, "I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted." That's the parable. Following an episode in the life of Jesus recorded for us in the previous chapter, Luke chapter 17. So the disciples experienced this episode and then they've heard that parable. Here's the episode. Chapter 17, verse 11. "Now on his way to Jerusalem," on his way to Jerusalem means he was going to Jerusalem to give his life for us. On his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. You had Galilee in the north. Jesus was a Galilean, a Nazarene. You had Judea in the south, and right there in the middle was Samaria. Jews would have nothing to do with Samaritans. Samaritans would have nothing to do with Jews. And as I shared with the 8:30 crowd this morning, most of the time a good Jewish person would not go through Samaria. They would go, as Hank would go around Cincinnati when he goes to see his grandchildren, I-275. You just go around it, you don't go through it. Is that the route you take? But Jesus decided, even though the traffic was heavy, he would go right through Samaria. And so the disciples said, "Okay." So they followed. And as he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. Leprosy was a skin disease, perhaps Hansen's disease. It disfigured people in a horrible way. They would lose limbs, fingers, toes. It was a horrible disease. They not only were regarded as being physically unclean, they were spiritually unclean. These people couldn't go to church. They had to stand at a distance. They were on the margins of society. They were pariahs, having been ostracized. When Jesus saw them, and they called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priest." In that day before a leper, even after overcoming leprosy, could be allowed to enter back into society, the priest had to examine this leper and deem that he would be clean. So it's as they're going, they have enough faith to go, that they are healed. They're going to the priest. They're going to be accepted back into society. When he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priest." And as they went, they were cleansed. And one of them, when he was healed, just one of them came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet. He worshiped him and he thanked him. He was a Samaritan. There wasn't any need for him to go to the priest, because the Jews hated Samaritans. This guy had a double obstacle that he faced. Not only was he a Samaritan, a foreigner, an immigrant, he also had leprosy. So while it's true that the other people could go to the priest and be accepted back into Jewish society, this person really couldn't. So he turned and he came back and he gave thanks and he worshiped Jesus. And then Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" And then he said to the Samaritan, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." Not just well physically, the word there is whole. Your relationship with God is now intact. You are whole. There is a time-honored story about Thanksgiving that floats around in preacher circles. That's an indication that what I'm about to tell you may or may not be true. Just so happens that this wonderful, godly woman was blessed with 4 sons. They went through school. She was able to pay for their college education. They did extremely well. They got out of college and they were succeeding excessively in business. One was the CEO of a major corporation. One was an attorney. One was a physician. One was the president of a major university. They had all done well, socially and financially. One night they had all decided to get together. They lived in various areas of the country, but they got together and they had dinner. Now their mother lived a way off, a couple of counties over. And they had a good dinner. They loved each other as brothers, and they got to talking after dinner. And one of them said, "I had a brand new house built for Mother. She's living in it." And they were all impressed. New house, wow. And the second one said, "I had a theater with Dolby sound. It cost $100,000 put in that house for her entertainment." Wow, were they impressed. And another said, "I had my Mercedes dealer deliver a Mercedes S550 4MATIC right into her driveway. Wow, they cost a lot." And the fourth brother said, well, you know how much Mother loves to read the Bible. She just loves the Bible. But you also know she's starting to lose her eyesight. It's pretty difficult. And I was wondering what I could do for my mother, and it just so happened that I ran into this preacher who had a parrot who could recite the whole Bible from Genesis to Revelation. The whole thing. This preacher told me that it took 20 preachers 12 years to teach this parrot all of the verses of the Bible. It was amazing. And he said, it is true, I had to pledge $100,000 to this preacher's church for the next 20 years, but hey, it was my mother. It was worth it. All she has to say is the book and the chapter and the verse, and this parrot, boom, can just give it to her. Wow. And they were really impressed. That must be the best gift of all, they said. After the holidays that year, the mother wrote her thank you notes. Dear Marvin, she said, the house that you had built for me is so big. I only live in one room, but I still have to clean the whole house. Thanks anyway. Dear Michael, she said, I don't travel anymore. I even have my groceries delivered. I'll never use that new Mercedes that's sitting out in my driveway. But thanks anyway. Dear Milton, that new theater that you had installed in my house, it will hold 50 people. But Milton, all my friends have died. And I can't hear. And I don't see very well. And I'll never use it, but thanks anyway. Dear Melvin, of all my sons, you were the one that gave your gift to me the most thought. Melvin, you know how much I love food. Thank you for the chicken. It was delicious. This coming Thursday's Thanksgiving. We're going to celebrate it. AAA tells us that almost 51 million Americans, 50.9 million to be exact, will travel 50 miles or farther away from home to be with family and friends to celebrate Thanksgiving. We're going to be on the road. We're going to be on the move. 46 million turkeys will be consumed this week. The ultimate sacrifice from these birds. So we're going to gather together this week, and there's going to be all kinds of fun and food and fellowship. And food and food and fellowship. It was the day after Thanksgiving, and a lady noticed and actually caught her husband standing on the scales. And he was sucking in his stomach. And she said, Fred, that won't do you any good. He said, yes, it will. It's the only way I can see the numbers down there. Well, I hope you have a good Thanksgiving. But if we're not careful, we will get so caught up in all the fun and food and fellowship and travel that we might just neglect what the holiday is really all about. To give thanks. Someone has said that there are basically two kinds of people. Those who take life for granted and those who live life with gratitude. So what about you this Sunday before Thanksgiving? Are you taking life for granted? Are you living life with gratitude? Or perhaps, like most people, this preacher included, we find ourselves somewhere in between. Some people take life for granted. Perhaps the classic illustration of taking life for granted comes from Thornton Wilder's play Our Town. You know the scene. It's been shared throughout the years. Perhaps you've seen the play. I've shared it before. There is a scene in that play where Emily, one of the main characters, finds herself in a cemetery. She has died during childbirth. And she asks the spirits to be for the privilege of going back and living just one more normal, ordinary day. Just one more normal, ordinary day. Somewhat reluctantly at first, they grant Emily's request, and she goes back to the day of her 12th birthday. And what Emily notices most are the simple things. The smell of coffee in the morning. The feel of a freshly starched dress. The taste of a home-cooked meal. A hug, a kiss, an ever-swift moment of tenderness. Emily pleads her case that all of us take these simple things for granted, but no one can hear her except us. Except us. And she finally says, "Oh, earth, does anybody realize how wonderful you are every minute?" You could not see or read this play without being touched. Because what Emily has said disturbs us, bothers us. It indeed is about us. Do any of us, ladies and gentlemen, ever realize life and how wonderful it is every minute while we live it? Jesus told a parable about a Pharisee who basically took life for granted. He was a religious guy. He went to church, did all the right things, but he just kind of took it for granted. In fact, one of the things that happens to us when we start to take life for granted is, if we're not careful, we'll start to feel entitled. You think it's all about us. I'm entitled to get the best job. I'm entitled to have the most money. I'm entitled to have the biggest house. I'm entitled to go through traffic lights, always on green on the way to work every morning. I'm entitled. And if we're not careful, we'll live with this sense of entitlement, even looking over to other people, like the tax collector, and give thanks that we're not like them, that somehow we're better than them. Go back and read the parable. The Pharisee prays thus with himself. He's not praying, he's giving God a report on all the good stuff he does. And he thinks it's all about him. Doesn't realize that his life is a gift. Every moment, every day, ordinary, special, anywhere in between. Doesn't realize that life is a gift. I thank you, God, that I'm not like these other people. Thank heaven. Do you ever find yourself feeling that you're just a little bit better than somebody else? They don't live in the same neighborhood. They're not from the same background. They don't have as much education. Maybe they don't make as much money. Look a little different. The missionary tells about the time that he was leading a worship service in Africa and Tobago. And he was leading a worship service at a leper colony, of all places. And so the missionary got up and they started out the service with requests of songs, hymn requests. And all the people, all the congregation were lepers, but this one particular lady who was horribly disfigured was able to raise her withered hand and say, "Can we sing Count Your Many Blessings?" And they sang it enthusiastically. But he could not. He just bowed his head. Later on, a friend to whom he had told the story said, "I'll bet you'll never be able to sing that song again, will you?" And he said, "Oh, I'll sing it again. I'll just sing it differently." Are you taking life for granted? The fact that you're here, that you could walk into this room, that you're healthy enough to be present, that you got up this morning and you're alive, that most of you will get to spend Thanksgiving with friends or family members. Do you ever just kind of take it for granted? Barbara Brown Taylor says that one of the ways that we can work on not taking life for granted is to be sure that we acknowledge every person that we meet, whomever they might be, as a human being created in the image of God. So here's her suggestion, practical thing. The next time you go to the grocery store, she says, try engaging the cashier in conversation. Now, you don't have to invite her home for lunch or anything like that, or say, "Come by my house for Thanksgiving." No. But take a look at that cashier's face while she is trying to find that particular brand of lettuce on her laminated list of produce. Here is someone who exists even when she is not ringing up your groceries, as hard as that might be for you to imagine. She is someone's daughter, maybe someone's mother as well. She has a home she returns to when she hangs up her apron here, a kitchen that smells of last night's supper, a bed where she occasionally lies awake at night, wrestling with her own demons and angels. "You saved $11.06 by shopping at Kroger today," she says, looking right at you. All that is required is that you look back. Just meet her eyes for a moment as you say, "Thanks." Thanks. Sometimes that is all another person needs to know, that she has been seen not as the cashier, but as the person. Don't take it all for granted. Don't try to live a life of entitlement. Give thanks. The scene that Jesus told tells us how important it is to express gratitude. And you know the story about the 10 lepers, and only one comes back. I've already alluded to the fact he didn't have any other place to go. He was a Samaritan, and even after he was going to be cleansed, he was still a Samaritan. He was still going to be ostracized. So he comes back to Jesus. And it's interesting there, it says that he throws himself at Jesus' feet. He praises Jesus. The word there is the word from which we get doxology. He gives thanks to Jesus. The word is Eucharisto, the Eucharist. These are worship words. He thanks Jesus by worshiping him. He gives thanks. This week when I was doing some research for this sermon, I came across an author that I didn't know about. I should have. Because she's had a book on the New York Times bestseller list for years, and this particular book has sold 7 million copies, been translated into 30 different languages. It's called Simple Abundance. It's by a British author named Sarah Van Breathnach. And it's interesting, if you'll bear with me for just an extra moment this morning, to read a little bit about why she wrote the book, this book that's been translated and shared with millions of people throughout the world. It goes something like this. Not long ago, I had lunch with a senior economist assigned to the Secretary General of the United Nations. This was a lady that was doing really, really well. And she told me that they use my book, this Simple Abundance book, to try to help other people get along with each other. And then she confesses that Simple Abundance wasn't meant to be a book at all. It began as a process designed to help me discover, possibly for the first time in my life, what really mattered in life. What really mattered. Why did my life need to change, she said. Because like 50 million other working mothers or 50 million other working fathers, my daily round had become a tug of war between other people's demands and expectations and my own genuinely conflicted desires and unrequited needs. I frantically multitasked from one obligation to the next so fast that my spirit felt as if it was constantly sprinting to catch up with me, which it finally did when I collapsed into bed. Mornings were a major source of dread. My first conscious breath wasn't, "This is the day that the Lord hath made." It was a sigh. How am I going to get through this day? Of course, I never complained to anyone else, but I whined to myself and to God until literally the sound of my own nagging nearly drove me mad and to my knees. And that's when, she said, I knew I had to change. And so, not knowing what else to do, I sat down at my kitchen table and I started writing all the blessings that I had. Not the things that I wanted, but things that I had. Before I knew it, I had listed 150 blessings. None of them had anything to do with money. Not one. And then she says, my friends, here's the Thanksgiving challenge for you. It's something that I do myself, she said. Now, every night before I go to bed, I write down in a journal, in a book, 5 things for which I am grateful for that day. So I took her up on it. This past Thursday, had an excellent heart report from my cardiologist. I had open heart surgery in 2008. Guess I could have died back then. I'm still here. He said, Robert, I'll see you in a year. You're going to die from something, but it's not going to be from your heart. Thanks, God. My wife and I had good conversations this week with our extended families. It was great. I had a great conversation with Ken Tonks. He was in the waiting room waiting for his wife, Carrie Beth, and we shared Starbucks coffee and talked for an hour and just shared. I worked out at the fitness center with my wife. That was the day I found out that Nick Stoner's baby sister, Olivia, was going to be okay and would get out of the neonatal care unit and come home. She's here today, incidentally. On Friday, there was 5 things. I had a visit with my mom. I was at the nursing home. We had a great visit. I walked with my wife and we talked and we exercised. I had a great conversation with a staff member. We just kind of shared stuff together. And I took enough time to go down to Hannah's Sandwich Shop and have lunch and read a book. Yesterday I visited with Doug and Nan McSwain. His stepfather, his mother's husband, had died, and it was a funeral. Had a good conversation with my friend Mike Taylor. I FaceTimed with my 2 Cincinnati grandsons. It was the delight of my day. I had a voicemail from Carrie Beth. Thanks for your call. Doing great. Be thinking about you. And then last night, my Florida sister and her husband flew in from Tampa, and they're staying with us for the next 4 days. And she and my other sister Sherry and all of us are going to gather this afternoon and be together and give thanks. So, would you dare to take the Thanksgiving challenge? And in the midst of being one of those 51 million people who are going to be traveling, eating those 46 million turkeys, would you take some time this week just to reflect at the end of each day 5 things for which you are grateful? At the peak of his career, it was said that Mark Twain was paid $5 for every word he wrote. It was pretty good money back then. $5 every word he wrote. 1,000-word essay, long book. So people heard about this. And one guy who was, kind of jealous, I guess, wrote to Mark Twain and sent him a $5 bill, and he said, "Why don't you give me a word?" Mark Twain wrote back to him, and he said, "I'll give you the best word ever. It's this word: thanks." Thanks. Thanks be to God for the gift of life. Thanks be to God that we can be here this day. Thanks be to God so we won't take life for granted, so that we'll live it abundantly. It's the best word. May it be our word. Thanks.